Welcome, everybody. This is Andrew Jones here at Climate Interactive, and I'm here with others on our team, including Janet Tchaikovsky and Travis Frank and Yasmin Zahar. Those three are answering what we hope are abundant questions from you. So go to the questions box if you have questions along the way. We're here, of course, with number 5 in our webinar series of using En-ROADS as part of the En-ROADS Climate Workshop and the climate action simulation game, which of course is our set of experiences built around the simulation model that is helping people take action in this challenging space of justice, health, climate, and the dynamics of the energy, food, and land ag system. Perhaps you came to our workshop on Tuesday where we engaged people in those questions, that combination, the intersectionality of all those issues together using our simulation model En-ROADS. Of course, we are going to be diving today into the best topic in this whole series, which is the beautiful field of system dynamics. System dynamics as a methodology for understanding the behavior of complex systems. So I think it's the coolest, partly because the ideas are so just aesthetically beautiful, as well as they are powerful for change agents. So there's some beauty here. So check out the beauty as we dive into this topic. Of course, we work closely with MIT Sloan School of Management and its sustainability initiative. We are a 13-person not-for-profit think tank ourselves, Climate Interactive, and you're part of this series. We hope that you're going to be able to use these. At this point, just to note where you're going next, you've gotten, this will be number 5 in your webinar series. I think after number 2, I challenged you in your homework to go show somebody, I was joking, maybe your pet, about En-ROADS, have them create a scenario. After this session, particularly after this one and the previous one, you should be able to sit down with somebody else, perhaps with more scrutiny than your pet, and walk them through some scenarios and get them thinking about some of the dynamics. So come out of this hungry to start engaging people with the simulator. Where you're going to go next, number 6 is multi-solving. I mentioned at the start, this combination of justice, health, other community issues along with climate. How do those issues interact? That's what the purpose of multi-solving is. Advanced facilitation, how to create an experience where people will see a future they really want and be able to align themselves in light of it, and also be open to changing their mind, being wrong, and actually learning from the simulator. And then number 8, the nerdiest, confidence building, testing, simulation science, all of these topics that are cool. Not as cool as number 5 though, which is about system dynamics, which is a modeling methodology and really a framework for seeing the world that grew out of MIT in the 1950s. And it is for the study of complex systems. Complex system where cause and effect are distant in time and space. You know, in En-ROADS, you move a lever over here, you grow some trees, you set a price on carbon, you go over here to energy efficiency, take action at one level, and it cascades through the system, affecting multiple things between the energy mix, carbon removals or carbon emissions, concentrations, temperature, sea level rise. The dynamics are difficult for our brains to handle. So we supplement our mental models, that is the models that are in our head about how that system works, with computer models. How do we supplement it? By having experiences with it. That's what we're training you to do. We're training you to improve people's mental models by using a simulation model. The core of it is to get to the bottom of the iceberg I've shown you before. The bottom of the iceberg is systemic structure. How does this system, its interactions, its accumulations or stocks and flows, its feedback processes, the ways that reinforcing growth builds on itself, or balancing processes where something starts to change, but then forces pull it back into balance. That's what we call systemic structure, there at the bottom of the iceberg. When you affect the systemic structure, you can be creative and transformative, shaping where things are going, as opposed to just reacting constantly to the events in the system. So today we're going to focus on the dynamics that's driving change in the model. We're also going to focus very practically on covering yourselves when asked a tough question, because someone's going to say, hey, facilitator, why did the red line go up? I thought it would have gone down. Why? And so this is going to help you both have an answer to that question, or if you don't have an answer, it's going to help you know where to find the answer to the question, maybe in our documentation, but more likely by looking around in the model and seeing what you see. If you loved this as much as I did when I ran into this field in 1989 as a student of Donella Meadows, the author on the left, I ran into this field and I thought, this is amazing. I want to learn more about this. If you do, go read her book, Thinking in Systems. Go read then John Sterman's book, another protege of Dana Meadows, who built this model with us, who's at MIT Sloan's Sustainability Initiative right now. It is the text of the field of system dynamics. It's an amazing textbook. Go read these two books. So here's what we're doing. Tips, insights into dynamics, some climate dynamics, other insights and implications of those tips, and then answering tough questions. There are two resources. So I'm gonna explain things, you're gonna listen, you'll take notes, you can go back and watch this again, but without us, you can go into Climate Interactive on our website and go study the same topic. So a lot of what I'm about to say is covered in videos in En-ROADS Insights. And maybe can someone, Yasmin, can you send them to this link, or maybe it'll be a follow-up, but many of the explanations are here. So if you go under energy supply in the videos and you want to see what happens if we tax coal, here's John Sterman explaining in 5 minutes the impact of taxing coal, or many of the dynamics that I'm talking about here. The other place to go is within En-ROADS. So you're thinking, oh, we're talking about electrification, I'm talking about transport. Wait, what is this about? How does it behave and why? Over on the right, there's some tips and explanations on the right. And if you click on the corner here, you'll get the whole user guide. The whole user guide, at the top of it, there's En-ROADS Dynamics, background on En-ROADS Dynamics. So many of the content is written here. Go and read it. If you're a reader, not a listener, that's where you can go next to learn more. Okay, let's dive into, go ahead.
Your video is freezing up a little bit, so I might suggest turning it off for a little bit so that the connection runs a little smoother.
We're going off camera. We're going to go into the content. You don't need to see my face right now anyway, so that's good. Thank you. All right, tips. Here's the first tip. Pay attention to when variables, like emissions, depart from the baseline future. Oftentimes when we talk about the impact of a solution, people will talk about whether it could be big or small. Could renewables grow to be big? Could bioenergy, carbon capture, storage grow big or small? That's important, but it's also important and often overlooked to see, when do these things kick in? When do they kick in? And what we'll do with this is, by the way, you'll get these slides later, and if you want to see the example that I used to make the point, down here it says example from En-ROADS. Click on that and it will pull up the example that I think illustrates this topic well. In this case, I imagined a change in a new technology like thorium fission. And I asked you to pay attention to when it kicks in. So here we are, encouraging, hold on a sec, my mouse just disappeared. Okay, it's back. I asked you to pay attention to when it kicks in. And in this scenario, we're imagining that this year it gets invented. It does take 12 years, excuse me, in this model, 10 years to commercialize the technology. And then it begins to compete with coal, oil, and gas. And it grows to the point where it actually gets to be the largest energy source in the world. However, even under that very optimistic time frame, greenhouse gas net emissions in 2020 would be identical. In 2030, we would have avoided no emissions. In 2030, 35 avoided no emissions. Then by 2040, we can look and see, okay, it is 3 gigatons lower. And only in 2040 do we start to prevent climate change. It takes a long time. That's really, really important. And it is a strong reason not to count on this new technology. Now, as an alternative, if we were able to implement a carbon price soon, note how fast that could affect coal, which is the purpose of any of these solutions, is to keep coal, oil, and gas in the ground. It could affect things very quickly and bring emissions down here in 2021, 2025. So that difference between 2040 and 2025 makes a lot of difference. Therefore, and it's not just carbon price, of course, it could be taxing coal or taxing natural gas. Other measures kick in very quickly. This is going to matter a good bit. Pay attention to when the emissions go down relative to the baseline. The second thing to watch for is that the first actions that you take when you say put together 10 different policies, 10 different moves of the slider, the first actions you take seem to deliver more marginal impact. The later ones seem to do much less. I'm going to pull up another scenario here. So imagine that you're taking action and you set a carbon price. And then someone says, oh, but I want to tax coal. And you say, okay, great, let's tax coal. Wait, we have a very high tax on coal. Temperature, what does temperature do? It goes from 2.9 down to what? It didn't do anything. Coal taxes are terrible. Let's not tax coal. No, that's not the case. Taxing coal on top of a high carbon price doesn't do anything because you've already peaked coal and dropped it significantly. If you, on the other hand, didn't have a carbon price and were to put a tax on coal, you can see 0.3 degrees. What you've already done really matters a lot. I've seen people have trouble with this and they will not make the proper conclusion. One thing you should do then in your when you're testing things, like imagine that you were making a scenario where you were testing multiple actions and such as a carbon price and energy efficiency and this and that and many things, and you're have a higher carbon price, so you're doing all these things, and then someone says to tax coal. Instead of just adding it on top, sometimes what you'll want to do is say, yeah, let's just do that from scratch. We'll start with a new scenario. I'm going to open up another EnROADS. So have a blank EnROADS ready, and then say, let's try it alone. Then you can see if we were to have a high tax on coal, it helps about 0.3 degrees. You're not mixing it up with other policies. So often keep a second tab where you can test things alone to see what the contribution of that one action is, not just on top of others. Okay. When you're curious about what's driving your temperature change, in particular, when you're curious and a bit stuck. So say someone asks you, again, why did this happen? Or why are we not reducing temperature as much as I thought? Here are the best 3 graphs to go look at to figure out what is up. So here's an example of this first one. Here you are, and I'm going to reset. And here we are at this scenario that we're making. And say you do a whole lot of things over here in the energy world. You got renewable energy, and you got less coal, and you have a carbon price and energy efficiency, and you're electrifying, and you got energy efficiency here, even electrification here. And you look around and you say, wait, I've done a lot of things. I've got 2.7 degrees. Wait, what's going on? The place to look, and by the way, most of the places to look with graphs are going to be here. You know this button where you click and you see the thumbnails of a bunch of graphs. The place to look is greenhouse gas emissions and removals. And it shows you the sources of the warming. Why are we warming? What are the contributions that we're making to the warming? And you can see, well, there's land use CO2 in green, energy CO2 in black, which is shrinking a lot, F gases, methane, and N2O. And you look out here later in the century, we haven't done anything on land use, F gases, methane, and N2O. Now, you could have that memorized, or you could just look at this graph and say, oh, I see what is causing the problem. And so what you do then is say, guide your group to go look perhaps at deforestation. You can see that wedge shrink. But the big one here is going to be in agriculture, in forestry, in wastewater, in landfills, in some industry. Look at that huge change over here in methane and others. So it leads you to focus on those other gases. 30% of greenhouse gases, not CO2. Growing more trees. Then you can explore other things like removal, such as growing trees or technological removal. But this graph is the way to understand what's going on there. The other really helpful graph will be Kaya. And other webinars have explained to you Kaya, but it's also use it to figure out what's going on, and also use it just as a framework about how you think about the drivers of emissions of carbon dioxide from energy. The basic idea is there are 4 things that drive emissions from the energy sector. And they are, put in kind of just vernacular terms, how many people, overall consumption by those people, the energy intensity, that is how efficient the global economy is, and then what is the fuel mix? Are we getting our energy from coal, oil, gas, renewables, biofuel? Where are we getting our energy? So really, if you squint your eyes, there are 4 things that you can do, and they all kind of are pushing this far line over here, up or down. So you might say, why is CO2 emissions going up? Well, it's because you've got growth in population and consumption that's being compensated for, but not enough, by improvements in energy efficiency and carbon intensity. See, these 2 go up, these 2 go down. If you want those emissions to flatten, then you either need to get these 2 not to grow as much, or these 2 to fall more. What do I mean by that? Well, if there were fewer people, that pushes it down. You see population goes down, so if we had less economic growth, that's going to push it down. In the same way, more energy efficiency is going to make us improve there. That goes down more. And over here with carbon intensity, if we had less coal and if we had less gas and a carbon price, that'll pushes it down. You see that you can see how these 4 forces push these emissions either up or down. And often if you get stuck, you can look to see what's going on by looking at these 4 factors that drive overall carbon emissions from energy. The other one you see a lot, which of course is global sources of primary energy, which you can look at to see what's going on in my system. Okay, these are the 3 big graphs to look at. Now let's explore some of the complex interactions between competing energy supplies and demand. How do these things all interact? The first one is what we call economies of scale and learning. And the idea here is renewable energy, actually all sources, but let's focus on renewable energy. Success builds success via a progress ratio. Here's the idea, and this is built into the model, this is in the world, and this should be in your messaging. This is great news, everybody. The fact that the more installations of renewables, the more progress down the learning curve. That is, the companies that make the photovoltaic panels and the wind turbines get more efficient at it. They learn how to do it better. The companies that install them, the grids that try to accommodate the wind and solar, everything gets cheaper, making the prices go down, making them more attractive, meaning that they get a larger share of the market share of new energy, which means more installations. This is a reinforcing feedback loop, a positive feedback loop. It's one of the best bit of news in the world. Energy economists, such as those at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, have been studying it. You may see graphs like this that show over here all the installations going this direction, and they're the cost here on the y-axis. Since 1985, it's been coming down, and here's an important number. The learning rate is 19%. That is, every doubling of installed base of wind, in this case, reduces the cost 19%. Over on the right, with solar PV, it reduces that cost 24% with every doubling of installed capacity. That gives you a sentence, which is good to memorize when people say, what's going on in the model, or give me some good news. And the sentence is, every doubling of cumulative installed capacity decreases the cost of the supply of renewables by 20%. Now you can explore that. I'm going to click on the link here and see, how does that show up in the model? Well, it shows up in the model here with that exponential growth, particularly here in the 2020s, 30s, and 40s of renewable energy. And if it's subsidized, it grows even faster. Now, how this shows up in the model, this is really great when people press you and they say, well, I don't believe your model. What are you, kind of with an implication that maybe you're hiding something? At that moment, definitely go over here, simulation, assumptions, and saying we are as transparent as we can be about our assumptions. In fact, here is that number. I told you before, every doubling reduces cost 20%. It looks like this here in the model, renewables, and there's a description here. There is a description of what the source is. Junginger et al., McDonald et al. Are two of the sources. Here's that number. It says 0.8. That is 1 minus the 20% that I told you, is how energy economists include that number in their models. If it was faster, if it was a 30% drop in cost with every doubling, then it would be 0.7. And what do you think that green line is going to do? Well, if there's faster learning, that's a faster growth in that reinforcing loop. And watch the green line come up. It's not 0.8, it's 0.7. And what difference does it make? Right there. I'm going to try to do it. I'll play it a couple times. So what would that mean? Faster growth in renewables, less coal, temperature comes down a little bit. And groups like Rocky Mountain Institute is dedicating their work to accelerating the learning rate, get those costs down so that the market can drive more adoption. So this is important, and as you can see, it also applies to nuclear and bioenergy and gas and coal, although they've really, like oils, it's very low because they've learned all they can learn. You know, it really got serious in the 1910s. So their period of great learning was in the 1910s and 20s and 30s and 40s. Okay, so there's the first principle, is economies of scale and learning. That's important. The second one is probably, this is the biggest. This is the most important one to understand. It's the long lifetime for fossil fuel infrastructure. It takes a long time to change the energy supply. It's kind of like, the best analogy I can think of is if the energy system you're trying to turn away, say, from an iceberg in the future, in front of you, you're in this big old ocean liner trying to avoid an iceberg. Unfortunately, the energy system tends to turn like an ocean liner, very, very slowly and gradually. It does not turn like a speedboat where you can just hang a left really quickly. And why is it that it turns much kind of like an ocean liner very slowly as opposed to a speedboat? Well, I'm going to show you a bit about why. And maybe just for the evidence that it does, I'm not even going to use new technology. I'll use renewables. You can see they're growing very fast. And I'll show you later here, that is really fast growth relative to, well, it's very fast relative to what it could have been, but it also is consistent with what a lot of other models think. But still, look at that. It's taking decades. Here we are in 2020. This is very fast growth through here, but it's taking a long time to overtake particularly coal and natural gas. Why don't we just build wind and solar all around the world? Couldn't it just jump up to 100% renewables over the next 5 or 10 years? And there are some studies out there, out of Stanford, which say if we were to just build it more from scratch, it's possible. We could just have a world that would be 100% renewable. But when you consider the long amount of time it takes for old capacity to retire away, giving our existing infrastructure, it's kind of like this. Think of the whole world's electricity generating capacity as 100 power plants. Imagine that powering all the electricity in India and China and the US and Europe and Africa and Australia, South America, everywhere, 100 power plants, okay? Look over on the right, and the old capacity gets retired away. It's 3% a year. That means that you have 100 power plants. Every year, 3 power plants get shut down. So you have an opportunity to replace those 3 with 3 new ones. So, okay, that's a chance. Wind and solar, other low carbon, but it takes a while to get the market share in those first few years. So you replace one of them or 2 of those 3 with wind and solar. Then you consider the growth, and the growth, we add 6% to the stock every year. That means if you had 100 power plants, you would add 3 to replace them and 3 more to capture the growth in demand around the world. So you only have a chance to add 6 new ones to this stock of 100. So even if all of them were renewables or zero carbon, that's only 6% then would be the total market share. So think about how long it takes to get to 100% renewable if this is how you are turning over the stock. With an average lifetime of 35 years, this is how the system is working right now. Your short answer when people say, why is it taking so long for renewables? Just say, well, the existing power plants last about 30 years. It takes a long time for them to retire away. Now, mind you, there's things that can be done to accelerate this. So if you want more renewables, you can also go down here and accelerate retirement of coal. And that is going to give you a little bit more. You can also set a carbon price that not only has you build more wind and solar, it also leads you to make coal, oil, and gas less attractive financially to even run. So you might not run them as much. You also can go to, say, natural gas and say, we are going to stop building new infrastructure, let that all retire away. There are other things to turn over that stock of 100 faster. But the fact that they last 35 years on average is the main reason it takes so darn long for this system to get rid of the fossil fuels and bring on the new low carbon actions. And it leads us to want to think, how do we retire more fossil fuel away? How do we just keep it in the ground, as some say? Okay, and there's another twist to this when it comes to new technologies, for example, is that there are just other delays. Like if you imagine R&D success in 2020, it could take 10 to 12 years to commercialize, and then you order capacity, and then you have another 2 years to develop and 5 years to construct. There's some delays even before you get to what we were just looking at, which is the stock of fossil fuel capacity in use down here. Okay, another dynamic, the rebound effect. The rebound effect is the idea that energy price and energy demand are linked. So one challenge we face with something like a new technology, say we were imagine them growing, it doesn't reduce emissions that much. Partly, it takes a long time. I've shown you why that is. It's the same reason as the 100 power plants. You only can bring on so many because you're retiring away so few. But a second reason is, imagine the reason this new technology gets picked up around the world is that it's inexpensive. It's inexpensive, and I'll show you where that is. Here's the cost of energy. It brings down the overall cost of energy. There it is, cheaper. The blue line is lower than the black line. If energy is cheap, what happens to consumption of energy? Well, there's less of an incentive for energy efficiency. There's less of a reason to conserve. So people tend to use a bit more energy. Now, it's not double the energy. They call it the Jevons paradox, that this boost to energy consumption. So when you get curious about what impact you had, go and look. I know it's not on the main view, but it is here with the thumbnails. Go and look. What happened to cost of energy? What happened to overall energy demand? Now notice how different it is than when you say have a carbon price, which changes the fuel mix, but it reduces energy consumption. Prices go up. When prices go up, people have a reason to conserve. So This is challenging when it comes to equity, but it is very helpful when it comes to improving the energy efficiency of their overall system. Look at the energy of GDP, energy intensity of GDP. The blue line falls faster. You remember I was telling you before, oh, look at various factors in Kaya. This is a good moment to look at Kaya. Remember I was telling you before about that? It both changes the carbon intensity, how many megatons of CO2 per unit of energy, and it changes how much energy is used. It makes energy more expensive. It gives an incentive to conservation and to technical improvements in the energy efficiency of both individual technologies, but also overall transportation systems, settlement patterns. If oil is expensive, people find a reason not to commute an hour to get to work. Other things that improve the energy intensity of GDP. You can see those two factors being changed here. Okay, that is the rebound effect that works either way. The next one, squeeze the balloon. Squeeze the balloon. The squeeze the balloon problem, I'm going to show you by clicking on my example, the example from En-ROADS. Here we are, natural gas. If we tax natural gas, I'm going to undo it, tax it again. What would you expect if you're taxing natural gas? Well, natural gas is blue. Look at the top left, the blue line goes down. Of course, you're taxing it, it's more expensive. That's what you would expect to happen. But what else changes? And this is what I talk about the beauty of the system. The first time that Dr. Lori Siegel sent me the model and she said, hey, check this out. We really do have this system modeled in a much more tightly coupled way than we did previously. Watch the brown line, she said. And I said, that is cool. Be cool, not great news, but cool intellectually. Look at the brown line. It's going up. We have more coal. Why? Well, it makes sense. Of course you have more coal. There's less natural gas. People need electricity. And so they are looking to coal because there's a lot of it out there. It's still inexpensive. Now you may say optimistically, well, what about wind and solar? That goes up as well. You can look at it over here. There it is. Watch the blue line in the bottom right go up. We have more renewables. The point of this is that there is a compensating impact in another sector because they're so tightly coupled. Squeeze on gas, get more coal. Squeeze on gas, get a little bit more wind and solar. And you'll notice, and if you ever get confused about why these changes are going on, get curious about maybe if there's a compensating feedback going on in the system. And it's not just this. You'll see it when you imagine less oil gives you more coal because, well, in this case, I think you get less electrification. Yep. No, more electrification, less oil. Say you divest from oil, that puts more pressure and more incentive for electrification. And that leads to more demand for electricity, which means to more demand for gas and for coal. These dynamics, the tightly coupled nature of the supply system is all over it. So keep playing with these and explore these interesting dynamics. Related to this is what we call crowding out. Low carbon supplies compete for long-term market share. So this often shows up. You will be showing people the model and they'll be asking, in this case, I want more renewables, and someone will say, I want more nuclear. So you'll make those changes and people expect that these things just add on top of each other. More renewables, more nuclear, but wait a second. We're boosting nuclear, but it's only saving 0.1 degree. That's very little when we make this change. And then when we add in new technology, let me just, excuse me. We have renewables and we have nuclear and we add a new technology. It's not saving that much when it comes to temperature. Now, why is that? That's because the only way that zero carbon supplies help is when they keep fossil fuels in the ground. Like, we don't need renewable energy, nuclear, or other low carbon supplies for their own good. We need them to keep coal, oil, and gas safely in the ground. So then you have to see what is the ability of these different supplies to keep coal, oil, and gas in the ground. If you already have a good bit of renewables and nuclear competing with one another, adding in another supply doesn't bring you much more. Certainly not as much as each one alone. So notice here, if I did all three to their max, that has saved 0.5 degrees. Now, if you do each one alone and add them all up, I hope this is right. I think I did test this. Okay, renewables brings you 0.2. Okay, remember 0.2. Nuclear brings you 0.2. Now we're up to 0.4. New technology brings you 0.3. We're at 0.7. So all three together brought you half a degree, 0.5. Each one individually 0.7. So 1 plus 1 plus 1 did not equal 3. They equaled a little bit less because they are competing for market share. They're competing with each other. That's what's going on when we have what's called crowding out and the competition between those low carbon sources. Okay, let's look at some removal dynamics. When you look at removal dynamics, and people ask, what about afforestation? What about agricultural soil carbon removal, which is kind of a hot topic in the climate world of debates right now? Use these graphs. Here are the graphs. Let me pull them up. So the graphs that I suggest looking at, I'm going to redo this, would be the stacked graph, and then also look at the removals on their own. And people, well, ag soil carbon is kind of a hot topic. I made a video about it yesterday. Under here, if you want to explore, this is no-till agriculture and other methods can have carbon not be released from agriculture as much. If you don't till the soil, the carbon stays underground for longer, and that can be a way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Keep it in the ground through ag soil carbon sequestration. We took the number from the Royal Society study called greenhouse gas removal, and imagine what if we had 100% of its midpoint. So there it is. So you can see in this graph very clearly it goes up to about 5 gigatons a year of removal. And when you show the graphs, this is a great way to see it because people can see, oh, it grows by 2040, it's 5 gigatons. It starts fading away a bit because people like stop using those no-till practices and some of the carbon gets released back to the atmosphere. And then you can hit the replay button for them to see it. But it also shows that 5 gigatons in the context of all the emissions. So here's the zero line. Everything above the zero line are what's getting added to the bathtub that is carbon and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Everything below the zero line are anthropogenic, that is human-driven removals. So that's 5 right there. You see that line goes down to about 5 at its maximum. There's 5, and then what's above it is this 100 or so above it. And it just gives people a sense of scale, how much and how modest those removals are relative to being what's put into the atmosphere from energy CO2, F-gases, land use CO2, and other sources. This is the best way to look at it, I find. It also can show other methods on top. It's a really helpful graph for understanding, well, what if we had direct air capture and others that could go on top of it up here. Pay attention to when the variables depart from the baseline future. I showed this was one of my first points, wasn't it? But here it relates to removals very clearly. I'm going to undo those 2 actions in direct air capture and in agricultural soil carbon, and instead focus on afforestation. And people can talk about how much afforestation we can get. There were a bunch of articles in the Guardian and the New York Times based on a big paper that came out in Science, of which there was an error, an erratum published recently. One of the reasons that afforestation is fairly limited in its ability to limit future warming is the timing, not the scale, but the timing. So when we test it here, look and see when the removals happen. Remember before I was talking to you about how important it is to get emissions to fall or for removals to happen in the next 10 years or the next 20 years. However, when we model what it would be to secure land, plant trees, and then wait for those trees to grow and pull CO2 from the atmosphere, note, which is something we probably should do, and make sure that it supports biodiversity, but it's also a natural way to prevent climate change. However, it takes so long. You can see those removals happening in the 2040s, here in the 2050s and 2060s. It takes so long that its contribution to avoiding future warming is fairly limited. You can see that temperature goes down 0.1. Now we need that 0.1. So if we can get it, let's go get it. But the point here for you as people who are explaining the model is to point to how long it takes. In fact, that paper I was talking about how these removals could make up for emissions that happened in the past, which doesn't really make as much sense because they're happening 60, 80 years, 100 years, 150 years after the emissions. Okay, watch for when the emissions removal happens over time. So some dynamics of the climate. This is really critical. One of the first ideas that we really wanted to share about the climate and carbon cycle system are bathtub dynamics. And it builds on a paradox that I want to welcome you to. Join me in looking at a couple interesting graphs. This on the left is CO2 emissions and removals. The red line is emissions. This is burning coal, oil, and gas. And here I took some actions with renewables and a carbon price and energy efficiency that led those emissions of burning CO2 to flatten over the rest of the century. So emissions are flat. Removals, and this is not removals by our efforts to have ag soil carbon or afforestation. This is just natural removals into oceans and into biomass and into soils. Those stay flat as well. So what you have is CO2 going into the atmosphere in red, out of the atmosphere in blue. And the way to think of this is as a bathtub. Those emissions are what's going into the bathtub. The removals are what's going out, and CO2 in the atmosphere, that is the concentration. You hear people talk about 350 parts per million. It is a concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, is the water in the bathtub. So going back to where we were before, you have a bathtub. The red line shows what's going in. What is that, about 45? This shows what's coming out. About double is going in what's going out. So you've got a bathtub, double going in, then going out. What is the water in the bathtub doing, the water level? Of course, it's going up. CO2 concentration is going up. Now, our intuition, and in fact, over 2/3 of MIT students who were given a quiz on this by John Sterman at MIT believed that if emissions were flat, concentration ought to be flat, but it's not. It instead shows these tricky bathtub dynamics. The implication of it is just rough news for all of us, but you knew this anyways, is that we can't just have emissions flatten. We need them to fall. So that's why we talk about net zero emissions by 2050 or so. What does that look like? Well, it leads us to want to take action sooner and bigger, more renewables, less coal, higher carbon price, less natural gas, more energy efficiency in buildings and industry, more electrification, less deforestation. See all those things, and then things that push up the blue line of removals. And then you can see if we have those emissions come down to the point where what's going into the bathtub is the same as what's going out. There in 2046, we have a bathtub that is in dynamic equilibrium. For you nerds, that's what we call it. Dynamic equilibrium in 2046, that is the year when concentration is at least flat. Of course, we want it to be coming down over time. These dynamics can be really interesting and helpful as you get a feel for how the carbon cycle works and how the climate system works. Okay, that's the bathtub. Sea level rise, in a similar way, adjusts slowly to temperature. So I'll pull up another scenario here where this is a 1.5 degree scenario. And I'm just going to take you through the challenge of this and the delays in the system that get you 1.5 degrees. It's kind of interesting just to note how the changes are delayed as you go down the causal chain. So watch here. The actions we take, let me get the actions that we take, such as a carbon price. Okay, I'm going to pull up a carbon price. What year does carbon price leave its business as usual future? Look at that, 2020. You can see it leap up. So there's the action in this case. The biggest action was a carbon price in 2020. Second question, what year do we see CO2 emissions? Well, it's right after 2020. Here in the 2022, 2025, you can see it departs. So a short delay, 5-year delay. The next delay is how long does it take to that actually show up in concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere. I'm gonna go down here to CO2 emissions, impacts, CO2 concentration. Remember, it was 2025 that emissions changed. We don't see concentration any different until 2035. There's another delay there. Concentration changes. What year do we see temperature change? Not 2035, but it really changes out here. Well, it is about 2035. Yeah, 2035 or so, you can see a small change, 2036. And then this last point, when is there an impact on sea level rise? Well, out here in the 2050s, 2058, 2060, you can see how it's delayed. So imagine and get a sense of the cascading and delayed impact, how it takes a long time for your action to trickle through the system. We can get into more of the dynamics. I'm going to skip over deeper dynamics of the sea level rise, but it's important for you to get a feel for that causal chain and the long delays in the system. And really the implication for you as leaders that is to face this fact that no matter what we do with preventing climate change, we have bought the next 20 years at least of sea level rise. So don't go to Miami and say, Miami, we are going to save you from sea level rise with these actions to keep coal, oil, and gas in the ground. That is dishonest because it isn't true. And people are saying it. We, of course, can do many things to be much more resilient to those changes and adapt better and prepare our communities for it. But as you can see, the dynamics are very delayed. More about the dynamics about the system. And by the way, just as facilitators, not every group is ready to hear that. I only share that with groups that, and I'm also, if I feel ready to handle the kind of emotional impact of that kind of news about the climate system. Don't just go spouting that off to people. You've been through 5 webinars. I trust you with this information as our colleagues. Okay, some other insights. One is that, as you've probably seen, there are many attractive policies that we may eventually need that don't help very much. That is a challenge, and it's something that we're thinking about saying more about. For example, we probably need to grow more trees to address this challenge. It helps point 1. Before I was ag soil carbon down here, we probably should change agriculture to retain more carbon in the soil, but it is no silver bullet. Look at that, point 1. And on. Deforestation helps, but not that much. There are many actions that we probably should focus on, even electrification right now. Absent greening the grid doesn't help that much. So to some degree, you could think of that as there are some low leverage things that maybe are getting too much attention, such as electrification on its own, but also that there are going to be the path to 2 degrees or 1.5 is likely made up of many actions across the sector. There's no silver bullet. Instead, it takes many seeds to plant a garden. It takes many seeds to plant this garden. The other implication of that, of course, is all of the scenarios that do get us to 1.5 keep coal, oil, and gas in the ground in the next 10 and 15 years. The ones that really move things a lot, of course, would be a high carbon price soon, action on coal soon, growth of renewable energy soon are the things that really tip the curve, because burning coal, oil, and gas is what's doing most of the warming. Therefore, stopping doing that as soon as possible is high leverage when it comes to preventing this problem. If someone has emphysema and shows signs of maybe they're getting lung cancer and they're a smoker, the most obvious thing is to stop smoking. That's what's going on here. Burning coal, oil, and gas is raising temperatures. Actions that stop us from burning coal, oil, and gas in the near term are high leverage. You're going to get some tough questions. The ones that we hear over and over again. Yasmin Zahar is on our line right now, and she gets a lot of the questions in Fresh Desk with Janet and others. This is one that we get, and boy, I have had some high pressure presentations where people are not happy about looking at what our business as usual is for renewable energy, that green line. They look at it and they go, what? But renewable energy is growing really fast. How can you be so pessimistic? And then, they start attributing theories to why we're holding it back. So I want to just help you answer that question to say, how do we choose our business as usual future? Number 8 webinar will explain all of this. The short version is that there are 6 integrated assessment models from labs around the world that do an excellent job of forecasting what might happen to various energy supplies. And they don't just look at renewables as one big stock like we do. They break it out into many different types. Now note, there have been a lot of analyses, say, of the IEA and how they've consistently aimed low and forecast low. So we should be open to higher scenarios, but for now, what we do is we calibrate to that suite of integrated assessment models. So here are the other models, 2000 to 2100. Here's the history in orange and blue. Here's the International Energy Agency's 2040 current policy forecast. The company Shell has a scenario they call mountains, that's right there in green. And these others are their scenarios, PNNL and NIES, PBL, YASA, PIC are these in 2050. We are at the high end of the 2050 forecast by other models. Here's the range by 2100. It varies a lot. We aim towards the middle. We said, let's be consistent with the suite, with the family of integrated assessment models for the scenario they call SSP2, their baseline scenario. Then the next question is, well, what if you crank up your future? What if you encourage renewables? So watch this as we crank it up. And what if we actually imagine a breakthrough in storage costs and the availability of storage to the point where we get all the way to 600 exajoules by the end of the century? How does that compare? Well, here's that scenario now in blue. And I'm just noting we should make it in green to match the next time we make this graph. But there it is in blue. And you can see how it follows the International Energy Agency scenario. It's a little higher in 2040. The high end of all of them, and these are the more, these are low carbon scenarios for the other models, high end here. And then we follow what's called the Shell Sky scenario, but we're above these other scenarios, as you can see. So we compare favorably to those. And you might also then ask, though, why is that? Why is the growth, it seems like it should be faster. Why isn't it faster? Why doesn't it grow faster, sooner, and larger? The main reason I explained to you before, if the world were 100 power plants, we only get to add 6 every year as we retire away 3. It takes a long time for this system to turn over. We actually need more energy storage to do it, and we can test scenarios of making that happen. More electrification would lead to more growth. We also mentioned before the rebound effect, that if it is encouraged by reducing costs of the energy, then you get a boost to energy demand. I'm going to pause here. There's some other questions that I'd like to address after the end of the hour. But what I want to do, just because we do like to end things on time, and what I want to do is engage all of you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick around after an hour is up in just a minute or two to address several more questions that come up a lot and answer some of the questions that you've been writing into the question box here in GoToMeeting. And I'd love to hear more from you all about how this course is going for you. Here is the link. Yasmin or Janet, can you send that, put that into chat? The link. Would you go and fill out this survey and give us tips about the overall training and how it's helpful, how we can improve it? You're also going to get this link in the follow-up email, but would you go right now to answer some of these questions? And if there were other questions that required more than a few sentences, do email them to us at support@climateinteractive.org. And be sure, if you're dropping off now, to come back for the next one in a week on multi-solving, and then on advanced facilitation, and then on confidence building, testing and model science number 8 for the nerdiest sciencey one. So I want to go back and answer more of your questions, or more questions that we think you're going to get answered. So stick around with us now. Everyone else, if you have to go, you have to go. Do go engage other people with En-ROADS and send us a picture. Sent you that support email address. Send us a picture of you engaging somebody else. Register your event on our website. We'd love to see what you're doing with it. Okay, so the first question that was so tough is, why don't renewables grow more in your model? The second one is this: why is there so much coal in your baseline future? And of course, we're all asking that about the real world. Why is there so much coal? And I want to show you what that looks like in the model. Why is there so much coal in this future? And I'm gonna, why does that brown line just grow and grow and grow and grow? Notice that the red line of oil bends over some. It bends over because in the model, we've set how much oil there is in the world. And you don't run out of oil, but it definitely gets more expensive because the cost of finding that remaining oil goes up. So you're starting to run into supply limits. It does not happen with coal. Why is there so much in this future? Even as here we're in the United States and we have the bankruptcy of some coal-fired power plants, some indication that a couple years ago we were saying that coal use in China had peaked. Why so much coal? So like we said before, how we answer a question like that is to say, where do we fit in the family of excellent integrated assessment models that are out there that do similar forecasts and have teams many times bigger than ours answering that question? This is a graph from 2000 to 2100. See that orange line is history, British Petroleum's history. So here we are calibrating ourselves to that history. Here is what International Energy Agency, World Energy Outlook says. They thought it should be at 200. We're a little above that, but we land right in the middle of the family in 2050 of these models: PBL, PNNL, PIC, NICE, YASA, and EIEE, the Which Globio model. Shell Mountain is here. Our colleagues at EPA are here. Growing, growing, growing. You can see we're towards the middle upper part of the whole family by 2100. So that's how we fit. That's how we calibrate to others. If you want to learn more about that, come to webinar number 8. Why, though, is that happening? First of all, there's a lot of coal in the ground. There's much more coal than we could ever really use in this century. That is not limiting things. And even as renewable energy is inexpensive, and in many parts of the world less expensive than coal, think of it as that renewable energy is very inexpensive and coal is still inexpensive. I didn't put a very on there, but it's still inexpensive. Because the energy economy is not a winner-take-all kind of world where the cheapest gets all of the market share, still it has been getting, and it is anticipated to get a large amount of market share. Now, mind you, unless there is regulatory action and other action to not build that infrastructure, or as Rocky Mountain Institute and others are looking at, the financing of the retirement away and the overall closing down of the coal industry can be done. Now note, we're not saying this is good for the world. We're saying this is what we've learned about energy economics. And note, we also like exploring scenarios such as a world where that's not true, but you could see coal going down there, or we actually imagine futures where reduction of coal is even greater and sooner. You can explore those futures. However, left to market forces around the world, coal is still cheap. The energy economy is not a winner take all, so it's still getting investment and growth. Other reasons is that there's a massive amount of coal infrastructure that is planned and under development. Some of it has been canceled, but still there is 538 gigawatts planned around the world, which is twice the current coal power capacity in the US. The demand is growing particularly in China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, much of Africa. Boy, I know people in Kenya who are witnessing the first coal-fired power plant ever built in Kenya, in East Africa, funded by China. So it's happening around the world. And what has been built is relatively young. A lot of it in China and India. That infrastructure lasts a long time. The other big reason is that investment isn't being just driven on cost reasons. Countries have energy independence goals. A country like India may say, we can build our own coal-fired power plants. We have our own coal. We're going to build it, even if there is a foreign technology in wind or solar that may be a little less expensive. We care about energy independence. Also, the coal industry around the world has a lot of political power and is able to use that power to secure subsidies that are substantial. So these are some of the reasons behind why you see that growth in coal. And the implication, my friends, is that we would then need public policy and other policies to not build that infrastructure if we want those emissions from coal to come down. Connected to this, when we do have growth of renewables, why is there so little disruption? Why is it, and you can see it in here, you'll get this question, when we have renewables grow, see the green line go up. Coal goes down, but it continues to grow. Look at that brown line still goes up. Why is it? Before I showed you, well, you can look to Kaya. One reason is we still have growth in population, growth in GDP per capita, growth in energy demand. So more energy demand around the world is one reason. And so we're still going to coal for more of that energy demand. And just because renewable energy is inexpensive, it doesn't mean that you're not still getting significant investment in coal. The point policy-wise is what's needed? Well, it would be needed to have coal taxing or carbon prices, other things that keep it successfully in the ground, beyond just counting on the disruption of that industry with clean, zero carbon energy. Okay, I think we now get to answer some of your questions. Boy, that was a lot of information I was just sending your way. And I know we're past that hour time. What questions, maybe Yasmin, start with you. What were some questions that you saw that you think everybody might be interested in?
Yeah, so.
Oh my God, look at my hair. Shoot, go ahead.
We're getting some good questions about different ways in which the model can be used, and more specifically, people are asking about how to leverage businesses in the private sector as well as different governments and policymakers.
Great. How to leverage business and policymakers. I think it's basically, the short answer is go run the En-ROADS Climate Workshop. Hopefully you joined the training before I'm going to go down to that page. Tell them the quote that you've heard many times. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. Go to them and say, if you want to think about the climate challenge, don't read another report, because research shows that showing people research doesn't work. We've spent 30 years in business, in government, telling people what we think are our conclusions and our answers. We haven't engaged them on their own terms. Tell them that research shows that showing people research doesn't work. We need to help people think for themselves about this issue. How do we do that? We do it with a dynamic model. Then just very simply go, open up En-ROADS, show them this. You can keep it really simple and just say, okay, what are we gonna try? Get them clicking and thinking about it. And then at the end, like we do in the workshop, say, how much would you love being part of a world that would make this happen? And they would say, I would love that a lot. And then you say, what are you gonna do about it? That's the whole workshop in a nutshell. And it works really well with government people, with business people, with community people, with anybody. Go sit down with them, go get on Zoom and take them through that process. That said, Yazzie, do you have an interpretation of that question that's different? Because there are a lot of different ways to go at it.
Yeah, and I think too, maybe something to add that might help answer that is the different levels at which people can present things. So a lot of people will be presenting to their local government or regional government, and they're wondering if En-ROADS can be tailored to a local level or if they'll have to present it at this global level.
So can it be tailored to different scales? Absolutely. There are very few people who are really in charge of this overall global system. This is for community leaders, state leaders, business leaders, national leaders, neighborhood people, because what we're doing is we're thinking globally about what needs to happen, what's high leverage, what's low leverage, the fact that success is possible in many ways. And then we put the model aside and we roll up our sleeves and say, what are we going to do now here in our neighborhood, in our family, in our business, wherever? Other questions that you see?
Yeah, so thanks everyone for the great questions. A lot of people are asking about if you could elaborate a little bit on fossil fuel infrastructure lifetime and its retirement, and how that might play into this idea of 100% renewable energy by 2040 has been pledged quite often.
Yeah. How does the fact the long lifetime of fossil fuel infrastructure play into 100% renewable? So one of the ways you can use En-ROADS is to set up, let's call it the 100% renewable game. And we don't talk about it too much because it's a hard game to win. Let's just look at electricity consumption, percent electricity consumption from renewables. And I want to make a distinction between literally a global supply of renewables that's 100% by 2040, and then the aspirational use of that term. And I totally support talking about the aspirational goal of 100% renewables by 2040. And as an energy and climate modeler, we're now going to look at how challenging that can be given the slow turnover of the existing infrastructure, as we described earlier. And this is that idea that if the world were 100 power plants, you gain 6, you lose 3 every year, and it turns over very slowly. Now, some people think of it as maybe we don't have to think about that turnover, we can just build it from scratch. Let's try. So if you just encourage renewables, here's that big boost. You get up to about 70 by 2050. But we still have a lot of electricity coming from coal. And you can imagine, well, we should have a carbon price that boosts us up earlier and higher, a really high carbon price. What if we have less coal? What if we, and so my point is you can use this as a way to look at all the things. What if we had more breakthroughs in storage. That gets us up to 85%. There are other uses that we haven't been able to touch. Trying to think if other things help, like electrification. Not really. Does energy efficiency help? In this model, it is difficult to truly get rid of all of the coal and gas. In this case, we have a good bit of gas by 2050. It takes a while, and it's very difficult to get our model to explore those possibilities of above 85%. So we tend to think of 100% removal as more of a aspirational, let's go for it, more than an energy planning kind of number. Because here you see, in this scenario, even with very aggressive efforts, it's pretty difficult to get above 85. Others? What else? I'm trying to think of like what else. Oh, there we go. If you kill nuclear, there you go. Get up above 90. You know, so yeah, hurt nuclear, and then you get less. What do we get to 92 or so? 100% is tough, but squint your eyes at it, and you get to explore the beauty of how this would help so much. Other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. There's a couple questions which we might cover in some of the upcoming webinars, but ways in which, because we've been talking a lot about businesses and government level, but more on a personal level, how might facilitators kind of encourage or inspire their own participants who might not be via business or government to take action and to really be a part of the solution at this individual level?
Personally, how can facilitators inspire other leaders? Do you think that the question is related to in a workshop setting? I assume that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think just in terms of, yeah, they're participants who aren't, if they're not presenting to businesses or to governments, but maybe community organizations or students, and how might they inspire their participants to
how might they
take
inspire participants who are community leaders and students?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what we find works particularly well in the framework that we have here is enrolling people in the goal. So when you sit down with this workshop, or it's just you and a community group, or you and a group of students, you sell them on this goal of these dotted lines, well below 2 degrees, 1.5. The Paris Agreement, the world has agreed, that's where we want to go. You can talk a lot about how much the world would be so much better if we did that. We don't tend to do that. Instead, just get them bought into how are we going to get to well below 2 degrees, and then you can mostly let go. You don't need to inspire them much. It's kind of like the gamification of this challenge. You just say, how are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? And ask them, and then you've asked them to take on the challenge, and they will then say, well, let's try. And you're going to try a lot of things. I got to 3.5. Oh no, I'm not halfway there. So give them the game, give them the challenge, and support them in figuring out how to get there, and then give them a round of applause when they do it. Have them have 60 seconds of silence to appreciate their success. That's how we tend to do it. I guess the other is, when you talk about community members, is helping them articulate what are the negative impacts of climate change that they'd like to avoid. That's another one, is get people grounded in what matters to them. I'm here in Asheville, North Carolina. It was vivid to me when Hurricane Florence, which was strengthened by climate change, sent some people, evacuees, to not have a place to stay. There's people living in their car. And I found through Airbnb that I could give them my place for free, and that's pretty inspirational. I don't want that to happen in the future. The other one is to bring in the concept of multi-solving. And that's what we're going to study in a week, where it's not just long-term climate impacts that we're trying to avoid, but near-term health, energy, water, community impacts of burning fossil fuels that are hurting people now. injustice right now, the fact that burning coal disproportionately affects people of color who right now are having more of a problem with COVID-19, higher death rates, which is a respiratory disease being exacerbated in some cases by burning coal. How can we have less burning coal, which then would perhaps ease some of the pressures on other kinds of injustice and ease things that are comorbidities to health problems like COVID-19. So those are the ways that you might connect with community people. Others?
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, just reading through, it seems like most folks have their questions answered.
And I would say go take the survey if you haven't done it. So right now, maybe you guys can resend that link, or maybe it's in your chat. Go take the survey right now. Help us learn. We need more feedback about how this is going for you. And take the model, sit with somebody, talk them through what I just told you before, and see what they learn, and take a picture and send it to us, because we're so inspired. Send it and email the picture to support@climateinteractive.org. We're so interested. And when you run that workshop, go to our website and register it. What does that look like? Here at climateinteractive.org, we say, here's the En-ROADS Climate Simulator. Scroll down here. Here is the map around the world. This could be you. You could have one of these dots, because you just taught, you could take 20,146 to 20,147 participants and put your dot here. How do you do it? You go to register your event and add it to the map. All you got to do is give us your name, the number of people, where it was. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, I think we're going to sign off, everybody. We really hope, I hope you were both empowered by what was practical here, but I hope that a few of you also appreciated some of the beauty of how this complex system behaves and how the field of system dynamics reveals some of the dynamics that are just so fascinating about how it behaves over time. Okay, we'll see you next week, 7 days for the number 6 on multi-solving. All right, everybody, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.